yourself. How are you? I'm gonna make this clicker work, okay? So I'm gonna talk about anti-glacial education. I just made that up, because I think that education is a pile of poo. And I think we can all agree that maybe not education is a pile of poo, but web design education, it tends to be a pile of poo. But I don't think it needs to be a pile of poo. I think it can actually be pretty awesome. And I want to talk about some of that stuff now. What I've tried to do as well is make the talk not about education, just about education, but also some other stuff that if you're not an educator and you want to learn some stuff, you'll learn some other stuff as well. So I've got some pointers for you too if you're already educated, which we all are, right? Because you're in this room, because the thickos are at home watching TV or on their Xboxes or something like that. So I'm Failer on Twitter. Failer is German for mistake. Most of my work in the past was about mistakes, but I've been Failer for ages, and it's hard to kind of change. And the hashtag is Anti-glacial, so that's like the opposite of glaciers, right? This is what we're going to talk about: wayfinding, joining the dots, and non-glaciality. That's like a term I just made up, right? First, a little light reading. I teach like Richard, so I have to kind of recommend some books, which is definitely something I try to. In all my talks, I try to recommend books. If you come and get taught by me, you're going to read a shit ton of stuff, and you're probably going to be forced to write a shit ton of stuff. Actually, I should go back here and say that normally that slide is a picture of Captain Haddock, and I say that I swear an awful lot, so if you're really easily offended, leave now, because I probably will swear. I swore when I was asking that question, and I will swear while I'm on stage. And I did commit a few years ago to try and stop swearing when I do talks. There's a friend of mine who sadly passed away from cancer about 3 years ago. Her daughter was going to university, and she was very concerned that her daughter was going to be exposed to people like me, and she was like, stop swearing, and I said, I'm going to do my best, and I think I made about 2 minutes before I was like, look at that fucking pile of shite. So, I will swear. We've seen these slides already. These books, I think, are pretty awesome. The Element Net. Jason Fried from 37 Signals, I don't know if you know 37 Signals, makes Basecamp, wrote the other day on the Signal versus Noise blog about doing something you love, and about saying that, you don't necessarily need to do something you love in order to, make a business that's a success. And then, if you haven't read it, read it. I think it's on, yes, I just said it's on the 37 Signals blog. It's basically like, he's making a, Basecamp is like a project management blog or working with a lot of people. It's not necessarily something he loves, but it's highly successful. But I do believe that if there's something you love, you're probably going to enjoy doing it a bit more. So I certainly would be in the other camp, which is kind of like if there's something you really enjoy doing, just spend your life doing that, because that's pretty cool. Because then it's not like work. It's just like time just goes by. And Ken Robinson's The Element is very good. This book by Robert Greene, Mastery, is very good as well. It's about the master-apprentice relationship, and Richard was talking about these new apprenticeship degree things, which to me is really interesting because I kind of learned in my career by being, I suppose, like an educated apprentice with a number of people working for masters across my lifetime who taught me lots of things that were not necessarily this is how you do this or this is how you do that, but they were more sort of things like clipping me around the ear when you could hit children and saying, don't fucking do that ever again to the client because it's rude or something. So, there's an awful lot that we can learn in that master-apprentice relationship. And finally, this book here, which is probably like in all my talks now. It's pretty much in all my talks. It's by Peter Drucker, Managing Oneself. I read this at least 2 or 3 times a year. It's very, very short. You could have read it on the flight from Belfast to here today. It literally is a really short read, but it's about how to manage your understanding. Are you a written communicator person or are you a talking communicator person? That's one thing that's in the book. Another thing in the book is kind of like every so many years learning some new things. You decide, oh, great, I'm an awesome web designer. Now I need to learn macrame. So you learn macrame, and then you learn a new thing. It's very, very good. Oh, sorry. That's why it's not working. Wayfinding. That's kind of what I think educators are. And Richard touched on this earlier when he had the kind of navigator thing going on. Most of what I do as an educator, I should say, I'm an educator, but I make some stuff as well. So, I'm kind of making shit and teaching shit. And the teaching stuff is coming from what I've made, So I make some stuff and then I go and teach the stuff. Or like I'm doing are you coming to the work? Who's coming to the work in the web thing? Oh, awesome. So all that stuff I'm basically learning right now. So what you're going to get in 2 days' time, I'm learning that shit right now because I'm going to be teaching you. But that's the way I think that education should be. I think education should be about kind of like, you think, oh, here's an interesting thing. I need to learn how to do that thing. And the best way to learn how to do something is to learn how to teach it, right? So if you have to teach something, you really need to understand how something works. And so, I probably found my calling as an educator because I like to understand how something works, understand it enough to be able to explain it to someone else so that they can then go off and do it. Most of what we do as educators is about giving people direction. Most of my job is saying to different students, you need to go and look at this, and you need to go and look at this, and you need to go and look at this. And then I'll see somebody else, and they're like, oh, so-and-so told me that I need to go and read about deep pile shag carpets. And I'm like, yeah, no, you don't need to read about that. You need to read about, Cronenberg. Cronenberg is really interesting to you. It's all, the directions are different for everybody, right? But most of what we do as educators is actually pointing people in the right direction. I don't actually know much about what my students are doing. They're very, very successful. I've been talking to a few people here earlier up on the smoking bit upstairs. My students on my master's course have secured over 600 grand, about 640 grand in the last 4 or 5 years on my master's course. They're fucking amazingly talented. And most of what they're doing, I have absolutely no idea what they're doing, right? I'm like, whoa, it's amazing. I always like to say to them that, I'm here and you're here. And when you start with me on my master's course, if you start with me on my undergraduate course, you're sort of here. You're probably below the stage, right? But by the time you're kind of coming through the degree, you've probably reached here. And then when you join me on the master's course, you're like here. And then after about a year, you're probably about here. And then after 2 years, when you're leaving, you're like fucking here. And I'm like, how the fuck are they doing this stuff? It's amazing. So basically what we're doing as educators is giving people direction, right? So that's like, can we do a laser pointer? Oh my God, yeah. Just like a map, right? Okay? You can't give people direction unless you're, an explorer. And I think that that's actually what educators are. Educators are explorers. You can't actually teach people stuff unless you've actually gone out into the wilderness and you've learned something by exploring. And most of my job, when I'm not working as a consultant or running design projects and stuff like that there, is kind of exploring. I go and look at something, I think, oh, that's really interesting. And then I go off and do a bit of work on that, and then I learn a new thing, and I sort of explore into the wilderness. And then I come back, and that's the thing I'm telling my students about for the next week before I get suddenly sidetracked onto the next thing that I'm going to go and explore. So if you ever meet an explorer, is it Ranulph Fiennes? Do you know that guy? You know the South Pole, North Pole? He went to the icy places, and he has frostbitten fingers, and his fingers are like that, right? My fingers are like that. They're proper fingers. But he has got like no fingers because he's been in the kind of icy bits, and I don't think he's got any toes either. I went to an amazing talk by Ranulph Fiennes. And he comes back from the place that he has gone and conquered, and then he has got to go and conquer another place, right? And that's the thing about explorers, that, once they've gone and explored a thing, and they're kind of like, oh yeah, there's no fucking gold in the Aztec Mountains. They're going off looking someplace else to find the gold. And that's the thing about education. Education is about exploring, coming back, and sharing what you found with the people that you work with. This is Becca. It's one of my students. She's on my master's course. She was taught by my wife, Cara. Cara is a silversmith. And Becca was a jeweler. We interviewed her about 3 years ago to come on my MA. It's now an MFA. And we interviewed her. We accepted her right away. Really interesting. And then she said the thing that kills you when you're a teacher, which was kind of like, yeah, thanks for offering me that place, but I think I'm going to go and take a year off. And I'm like, fuck, we've lost that girl. She's never coming back. And they do. They come and you accept them on the course and they fuck off and leave. And they go off exploring and they never come back. And then you meet them about 5 years later, even though you're saying to them, you should come because I'm going to change your life. I'm going to change your direction. And then they come back and you're like, they don't come back. You meet them in the street and you say, oh, how's it going? And they're like, oh, I work for a dentist now. I'm like a dental hygienist or something. And they're like doing a shit job, right? That's one particular guy who I tried to persuade to come on my MA. I was like, if you come, Mark, you're going to go here. If you don't come, Mark, you're going to go here. And he didn't come. He went over here. He's in a shit job as a dental hygienist. Becca came back. And I was like, yes. She was a jeweler. She was talking to somebody in Marks and Spencer's, which is where she works. And she was chatting to this guy, and he was facing away from her. And she couldn't understand why he was not responding to her. And eventually she discovered that he was actually deaf. And she felt very embarrassed by the fact that she'd been talking away to this guy who was deaf. He obviously couldn't hear her. So what she did, which is not what other people do, but she's an explorer, she went and learned sign language, and she learned about the deaf community. Her partner is deaf, who she met because of that experience. And she came back to me a year later and she said, what I want to do is design for the deaf community. And I was like, awesome, right? The deaf community, if you've seen products designed for the deaf community, it's a fucking disaster. All of the stuff designed for the deaf community is terrible, right? It's really, really bad design. And I was like, look, here's what you need to do. You're a good designer. The deaf community's design stuff is shit. If you just take your amazing design skills for this community, you're going to do awesome things. This is what we are teaching her. Okay, she was a jeweler before. And why I'm showing this is to sort of say that education is really difficult. So we're teaching her about graphic design, interaction design, market research, pricing, psychology, grant applications, delegation, project management. That's like the tip of a really big iceberg. She's developing iOS apps for the deaf community. And she's doing really, really well with it. But we're not teaching her one thing. We're teaching her a bunch of things. And that's the challenge for educators, I think. Shit's getting real. Anyone who tells you education is fucking easy is a fucking idiot, right? So anyone who's like, oh, those fucking educators, oh, yeah, they're on the pig's back, oh, they get paid by the public sector, oh, yada, yada, yada. You know, all I want to do is punch them in the face repeatedly and then kick them in the balls. If they're a guy, if they're a lady, I'll probably just say, fuck you. But, you know, education is really, really hard because what you're doing is you're trying to put together a very complicated... Josh, am I swearing enough? Okay, good. But anyone who thinks that this is easy is an idiot, right? Because it's actually really complicated. Because you can see from the list of things that I showed you before that we're not just teaching her about iOS design or graphic design or interaction design or all those kinds of things, which is what I thought I was going to be teaching. We're teaching her about project management, delegation, all that kind of stuff. She's now working with a team of people and managing that team. And she has about maybe 3-4 people, 2 different companies that she's working with on a product that she's developing. She has a spreadsheet that looks like this. I'm pretty stoked when I see this. You know, she's got like this much money, 2,500, that's the deadline. Didn't get it. This much money, £5,000, 30-minute pitch. Not sure right now. You know, she's got this kind of list, right, on her laptop, right? This is not what I signed up to teach. What I signed up to teach was like interaction design. But this is what I'm teaching now. I'm teaching all that shit as well, but I'm teaching this shit too. And she has this really organized list of when are the deadlines, how much is the money, what do I need to apply for? You know, I need to be organized about this approach, right? And that's something that we're teaching too. So anyone thinks that teaching is just about this one thin slice of stuff is making a mistake, because actually we're teaching that stuff as well. And I'm super proud that she's already, whoa, Jesus, that's that thing, 37 grand, right? I emailed her this morning after she sent me that photo of her. By the way, which she got the photos taken by a professional company, so she looks like a professional. Because before she had these photos that were like selfies, And I was like, whoa, you need to change those selfie photos because they don't look like people would invest in you because you don't look like a professional. So she took that advice on board, went and got professional photographs taken, and that photo I showed you a minute ago was professionally taken because she treats herself as a professional. And that's why she's got 37 grand already. And she asked me to say to you that if she gets the next 20 grand that she's in for just now, she's into the second round of a thing called Propel in Northern Ireland in Belfast. If she gets that, that's 57 grand. And I can tell you pretty confidently that she will get onto that Propel program. And she'll have 57 grand to build this thing. I had a conversation with this guy, Alan Livingston. I don't know if anyone knows him. He works for the Design Council. And he used to be the dean, I think, of Falmouth University. Really, really good kind of like art and design course in Falmouth. He works for us in Belfast as a kind of mentor stroke visiting professor type thing. And we're sitting down, we're having a chat, and one of the deals with these visiting professor people is you get to meet them for like an hour every so often, and they just kind of shoot the breeze with you. And we're chatting away, and he's the most soft-spoken guy. He's like in his 60s or 70s, probably in his 70s. And he said to me one day, he said, "Chris, you're a designer." And I said, yeah, mm-hmm. And I started to list some of the things I was working on as a designer. And I said, I'm doing some stuff for the Royal Mail right now, and I'm doing some stuff for, Absolute Vodka. I listed some clients I was working for, and he said, no, you don't understand, Chris. You don't understand. And he was like way 20 steps ahead of me. I was kind of like in this kind of mundane world of design. He said, no, you're a designer of minds. And I don't know about you, but when I heard that, I was like, right. In the room with him, I was like, yeah, totally cool. I'm a designer of minds. And then when I left the room, and I left him, somebody else went in with him for some time, I kind of walked back to my studio, and my brain just went and exploded. I just thought, Jesus, that's what I am. I'm a designer of minds. So actually, if you ask me what I design people. I design people's futures. I design all that. Gee, wow. It fucking totally blew my mind. And I think that's what educators are. They are designers of other minds. There are people who come together and they look at all the things and they see a problem and they say, you need to look at this, this, and this. Do that, and then you'll be awesome. And then they are awesome. So this is a bit for people who are not educators, joining the dots. So what we talked about before was kind of like educators are directors, or they're navigators, or they're explorers. They're people who go out and find stuff, and then they point it in the direction of the people that they work with or that they mentor. The other thing is what educators are, or, well, good educators, I think, are designers of minds, but they're also joiners of dots. So they see the connections between different fields of experience. So this is stuff that we could use the laser pointer here. Can we use the laser pointer? Yeah. Look, this is all stuff, right? This is all fields of knowledge. And what we can do as educators is we can start to connect that stuff together. And when we do that, we start to build something that's really quite rich, I think. Does anybody know this guy? Anyone? Oh, no, really? Oh, come on, man. Seriously. Okay, so if you don't know this guy, you learn something new, and it's in the notes, which are on the computer over there. I can't even read them, but I can do it from memory. The guy is a guy called Charlie Munger. Does anybody know Charlie Munger? No? Okay, well, you learned something new tonight. Does anybody know Warren Buffett? Okay, Warren Buffett, super awesome investor, spends, earns a shit ton of money, runs Berkshire Hathaway. This is Charlie Munger, is Warren's business partner. Warren was trained as, I'm going to say an astrologist, but I don't think he was, because I think that might be like tarot card reading or something. I think he's more of a science of the moon or something like that. He worked in the army or the navy or something like that, some kind of armed force or something. And then Warren Buffett kind of pulled him in and said, you should join me in my kind of like kingdom of awesomeness, which is investing amazingness. And Charlie Munger has this theory called a latticework of mental models, which we are totally going to get on that slide. Just Google that and read that. It's really, really interesting. And this again comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is where if I'm teaching you, It's not just about design, or it's not just about interaction, or it's not just about HTML, or it's not just about CSS. It's about shit like this, which is way more powerful than kind of all that stuff that we just talked about. That's awesome too, in case you're feeling a bit kind of like, oh, he just told us we were rubbish. But this idea of a latticework of mental models is by Charlie Munger. You think of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, and you think of Warren Buffett maybe, and you think that Warren Buffett goes into his office and he has like a whole shit ton of screens, Bloomberg screens in front of him, showing shares going up and down, all this kind of stuff. And that's what they do every day. That's actually not what they do. And if you read anything by Charlie Munger, which I would recommend, he talks about the fact that, what does he do? He just goes into work and he kind of pulls up his chair, maybe shrugs off his shoes, puts his feet in his woolly socks on the table. He just reads for a while, And then, Warren's probably like, how's it going, Charlie? And he's like, oh, I just read this article on psychology. It was really interesting. That's all they do. They just read a shit ton of stuff. And what they are doing is they're building a latticework of mental models. They're looking at all of these different areas of knowledge, and they're pulling them together to make an incredible tool, which means that they can invest in things in ways that other people can't, right? Tesco's. You know Tesco's? Do you know Tesco's? Yeah, awesome. That company's going down the shitter, right? Yeah? Okay, I bought those shares about 2 weeks ago because they were really going down the shitter. And they're already not in the shitter and they're going up. But yeah, everyone else is selling those shares because the company's in the shitter and it's going down, right? But, anybody who looks at it and thinks, this is psychology here. Everyone's bailing out, but the fundamentals of this business are pretty sound, right? We can invest in that company, it's going to come back, right? Every single thing. I don't want you to think I'm a massive investor. It's like my gambling, basically. But Apple, Lenovo, these guys, Tesco, or, Lloyd's Bank, that's probably not my best one. They were all going into the shit, and I just went in there and just bought a ton of stuff when they were in the shit. And they've all come back up because they're fundamentally sound, right? But no one else is looking at it that way because they're looking at the charts going down like this, and they're like, oh, Jesus, there's a sell. And I'm like, bye, right? So that's why they are so successful, because they have a much bigger toolbox to understand the world. Munger talks about this idea of man with a hammer syndrome, which is that if you're only equipped with this set of knowledge, you will use this set of knowledge to solve all of the problems. But you need to understand more of the world in order to understand the world's problems. So he encourages everyone to broaden out their sphere of knowledge, to look at psychology, to look at kind of humanities, so to look at a broader set of things. And if you do this, he says you create what's called a Lollapalooza effect. And I like to think of this as the slide I show to my students all the time. It's like 1 + 1 is 3. It's like, normal people come and they know this way of solving a problem, and that leads to this inevitable outcome. But if you just add one more thing to your tool set of knowledge, you're going to have a much richer palette of understanding in order to solve the problems of the world. These are the kinds of things that I think that we need to teach. Nobody told me when I signed up as an educator that I would be looking at behavioral science, or I would be spending a lot of time looking at economics, or I would look at psychology or anthropology. But these are all things that we have to teach. And that's why education is really, really difficult. When they come together, what we end up with is a really rich toolbox that we can use to solve the problems of the world. And that's what Tim Brown, that's not the Tim Brown that you know probably from the typography thing from Typekit. That's a different Tim Brown from a company called IDEO, calls T-shaped people. So these are people who are really, really good at one thing, that's this bit here, but they have an understanding of the world, which is this bit here. And T-shaped people are the people who are going to shape the future of the world. And I probably think that most of you in this room are T-shaped people because you're here, right? Most of the rest of the lazy-ass fuckers who are at home are like, they're just these people. They're just like, I'm pretty good at this thing here. I don't need to know all this shit over here. I'm just going to watch the telly tonight, Coronation Street or whatever, right? EastEnders or something. But in order to function as a effective designer, you need to have both of these bits of the T. Okay. I made this shit up. Non-glaciality. This is the bit that sort of talks about education. This is the problem with education, I think, is that education is so glacial. It is so slow, and Richard touched on it earlier on. It's incredibly frustrating. Are we videoing the talk? Yeah, we are videoing the talk, are we? Yeah, fuck it. I've said this on so many talks, it doesn't really matter. I probably will get the sack anyway. It doesn't really matter. The problem with education, especially in our industry, is it is way, way too slow. Okay? So something happens, we change, and then we're like, oh, fuck, we can't change it. It's in the curriculum, we can't change it. We had this about maybe 4 years ago when Nicholas and myself, we were the standardistas, published a new book on web design, HTML and CSS Web Standard Solutions, a standardistas approach, the longest title in the fucking world. And we said to the guy who ran our course, because it wasn't us, we said, right, this book has been written for the course, right? We have to teach HTML and CSS in semester 1. Okay, we need to get our students up to speed on building websites within 1 semester, right? And we actually had this conversation with this guy who shall remain nameless. He was like, yeah, we can't do that because we do HTML in semester 1 and CSS in semester 2. And I was like, right, okay, that's absolutely insane. Because we wrote this book as a 14-week, kind of 14-chapter book, so that 1 chapter you read before you start, 12 chapters you do while you're with us, and 1 chapter you read over the Christmas holidays, and then you're fucking awesome, within a semester. And he was like, yeah, not going to happen because HTML in semester 1, CSS in semester 2. Do you know the way that we found around that problem? Other than the fact that I said, my fucking 14-year-old son has done that book in like a month, right? So we can do it in a semester, right? We just fucking changed it anyway, right? We didn't tell anybody we were going to do it. We just said, right, yeah, we're doing HTML, but we're doing the CSS stuff as well, right? I find it so frustrating. What was on my notes here, I can't see them, they're over there, they're actually in my bag, was a conversation that I had with Paul McKeever. I don't know if you know Typecast. Do you know Typecast? So Paul McKeever from Typecast and I are having a conversation in 2009, which is really depressing to me. It's not depressing we're having a conversation in 2009. I think Paul McKeever is awesome. I love Typecast. And he said, when is your new course going to start? This is the new course that we just launched this year. And I said, his response was, would it be launching in 2010? And I said to him at the time, no, probably 2012, because that's the speed of education. And what's depressing to me is that course that we were talking about in 2009 didn't launch until 2014. Right? 10 years I've been working as an educator in the University of Ulster. It's a little bit longer. And I've been saying we need an interaction design course. 10 years. It took 5 years from us actually getting the bits in place to actually get that thing up and running. Nightmare. Like, that in industry, this is more like what it's like. It's not like glaciers, right? It's like speed skaters, right? Things move really, really fast. They move really, really quickly. And yet, for some reason, education is slow, industry is fast, and there's this disconnect between the two. I don't think there's a problem with that. I think you can fix it just by breaking all the rules and just doing what you want, right? Just don't tell anybody you're doing it. Delete the whole video here, right? But more importantly, why is that guy touching that guy's ass, right? Okay. This is something else I passionately believe in. You need to make, and when you make, you learn, and when you learn, you share. And once you've gone through that loop, you got to go back to the beginning, make, learn, share. Educators need to be making stuff right now in order to understand what they are teaching the students of tomorrow. It's not enough to go into education and suddenly stop making things. And Richard talked about the fact that he still works. I still work as well, and my entire team also works too. I know an awful lot of people who are educators who went into a university because they were like retiring or something. They weren't actually retiring. They were going to university because they were going to get paid every month, and they're going to get a really decent pension, and they had, as far as they were concerned, stopped learning. And I have seen examples of slides by educators where I look at them and I think, Jesus, you can't even buy the books for this particular thing anymore because they were out of print 10 years ago. And people will say to your face, other educators will say to your face, they'll say, there's nothing wrong with that. We're teaching principles here. And I'm like, yeah, well, we could teach more up-to-date principles, right? I think you need to be making in order to teach. And this is definitely a belief I have. An educator who's not a maker is only telling half the story. Whether that is writing about what you do. For 5 years, I did this with Nick, the standard thesis. For 2 years, I was a lazy-ass motherfucker and didn't do anything. I was going to do a new blog, never quite got around to it. 1st of January, I got up and started making this shit. And it is like beautiful HTML. Responsive, right? It's totally, it's totally responsive, right? But the content is pretty sound, right? Whether it's sharing the stuff that you found so that you're trying to keep up to date with what is actually happening on the internet right now, or whether it's writing books, which is something else I do a wee bit of. This is a really good book. Buy it. In fact, buy all the books from 5 Simple Steps. But buy both the Craft of Words books. They're very, very good. Especially if you're coming on the work in the web thing. You expect more of this pitching of these books to you in the next few days. Whether it's building like a ticketing app. This is like me, 2 of my students, 2 guys, Dave and Kyle. Dave is a really awesome front-end designer. Kyle's an awesome front-end designer. Dave likes a bit of hardcore back-end action. 2 of them, like marriage made in heaven. We came together and we came up with this idea for something that was like Eventbrite, but it was way nicer. And we secured some investment for that, which was pretty awesome. And that taught me a whole bunch of stuff about dealing with lawyers, taking on investment, VC funding, angel investors, Halo, all that kind of stuff. This is kind of like making stuff in order to inform your teaching. Or whether it's just kind of making this so you can tell your wife you really need to buy one of these so that you can prototype this on that, right? Which is kind of like totally what I was going to do one night. I asked my wife if I want to buy one of these. She was kind of like, how much does it cost? And at the time, it was like 250 quid or something. And she was like, no fucking way. And I was kind of like, okay, cool. I'm just going to go to the studio. 5 hours later or something, I came to bed at 5 o'clock in the morning. She was like, what the fuck have you been? And I was kind of like, oh, just making some prototypes. And then the next morning, this kind of was all over Twitter. People were like, oh, this is fucking amazing. Make it happen. And I was like, oh, I need to buy one of these so I can test this. Totally like make stuff so you can buy shit like this. Awesome. Richard, happened to me once. Or whether it's like running a conference, right? I mean, I ran that conference in Belfast not just so that I could run a conference, because that was pretty awesome, but I ran it because my students were coming to me in droves and saying, I'm going to do a Kickstarter. And I was like, Kickstarter's awesome. But I didn't really know what running a Kickstarter was like. I mean, I know a lot of friends who've run Kickstarters, but I've never run a Kickstarter myself. So for me, running this and doing it as a Kickstarter was like, I'm going to learn a shit ton of stuff so that when my students come to me and say, run a Kickstarter, I'm like, whoa, do you really want to do that, right? So we can only teach based upon experience. So the bottom line, I suppose, as educators, we need to keep it timely. We can't be teaching this 10-year-old stuff where you can only, if you can only buy a book for your course on eBay, I think that's a problem. And if you can only get a copy of the book on Google Books because somebody scanned it in because it's totally out of print, I think that that's an issue right there. I think we need to constantly refresh content. I am a complete rule breaker as far as that goes. If this is broken, fix it. And I said to at least a couple of people I met who are coming to the work in the web thing, I mean, I haven't even made my slides for Thursday. I'm going to keep making them probably tomorrow night, right? But I'm learning a whole bunch of new stuff so that I can teach those students on Thursday stuff that's like right up to date. And I'm looking through the stuff and thinking, that's no good because that's from 2012. And we're in 2015 and my mind tells me that that's actually probably changed, right? Share as you learn.